So today in this lecture, I think what we're going to cover is adding in the last little details in terms of what sort of objects we want to add into our scene. Now that we've got kind of a basis for our city, if I just turn off this light, we've got the basis for our city. We've got a couple different buildings, some trees, but I'm going to want to add in some more detail, like maybe a car or like a bus stop, or maybe some sort of like little park or something kind of off to the side. I'm not sure. We'll just kind of see how things shape up. But I do like the idea of a car, a little quick, crude car kind of driving through, and then that way I can do the trick that I did with the building, which is model the same car and then make a couple variations and just change the color of it to make it look like I did more work than I did. Is usually a cool little trick. So I guess let's start with that then. So in this scene, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a cube, and I'm going to size this cube to be about the size of the road. Now I'm probably not going to make a very realistically shaped or realistically proportioned car. I'm not going to make it probably like half of the width of this road. I'm probably going to make it just the width of the whole road. So this looks about right, and I'll just make like all the roads one lane or one direction roads, just because I think like the cars will be too small. So we'll name this car base, and then I'm just going to copy it into a new file, and then we'll model this from here. So just like how we did the buildings and stuff, we're going to do this real quick and with not a ton of precision. So I guess real quick, let's open Chrome and get just an idea of what we're going to kind of make. So there are lots of inspirations for how to make a low polygon car, but I'm going to make something that's probably kind of in the shape of this with maybe not quite as much detail. So we're going to have like a very large kind of cabin or a cockpit inside where the driver would be, and then a relatively small sort of body. So very kind of stylized and accentuated proportions. This is not, actually that's probably the same one maybe, who knows. So yeah, well, let's start with our knife tool and just do a loop, because what we're going to do is we're going to make, oopsie daisy, we're going to make kind of our first cut that would represent sort of where the body is going to be versus where the windows are going to be. So something kind of like that. And then we'll pull these two polygons out and extrude them. Or not. Oh, sorry, my axis point was on, so we don't want that. There we go. So I'm going to make one side not quite as big, because this will be where the trunk of the car is going to be, and then this will be where the hood's kind of, and then we'll slope this one back, because this will be sort of the windshield. Slope this one ever forward just a little tiny bit, and then scale these two in just so that we're making kind of a little bit of a rounded shape, not too much but just a little bit. And then we'll select where all the windows will be, and we're going to inwards extrude because we want to make a little bit of space for the pillars. I want to uncheck preserve groups in this case. The pillars, like the A pillars and B pillars of the car. This is going to be a two-door coupe, so we're not going to have a C pillar sort of in the middle of this window. So just like this. If you wanted to, you could add a loop kind of through the middle here, and you could make it so that you'd have kind of two sets of doors on each side. If you wanted to make a sedan, it's up to you. So extrude inwards just a little bit. I think that'll be plenty. And then while we're here, we're going to make a selection, and we're going to name this glass windows selection. And then we'll apply a material to those windows later, sort of like how we did the reflective glass for the buildings. So for the body, we can add in a little bit more detail, sort of horizontally here. Scale this out kind of slightly. Scale these out a little bit so that we'll have a little bit of room to put a bumper on the front and back. I'm going to raise the portion of the trunk ever so slightly, just because I want to kind of make a little bit of style to this. Feel free to get creative on your own. Let's get a little bit of a slope for the windshield. Oopsie daisy. So this one doesn't really include much detail for sort of the door or the fender. Well, there's a little bit for the fender, but there's no sort of wheel arch, and I kind of want to demonstrate just a little bit of that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And at this point, it's probably going to be easier for me to split the model directly in half and use symmetry from here on out. So that way I only have to do all of this stuff once. So before I proceed, I'm going to do that actually. So I'm going to make sure that I insert my loop cut at 50% by tapping Shift. And then turn off only select visible elements and just select all of these points on one side of the car and delete it. And then we'll use symmetry to get the other half, like so. But I don't need that on right now, because I'm just going to focus on modeling and the rest of what I want to model. So to make this wheel well, what I'm going to do is inwards extrude a little bit, but I want to, in this case, make sure that preserve groups is on. And then that way I can start that cut. I'm going to bring in these polygons a bit and bring these in over. And then we'll see that if I grab this line here, actually no, I want to delete these. Or do I? No, because I can't just bring that up. What I can do is extrude this inwards, and it's going to be kind of ugly, but I can clean it up a little bit. So really nothing too fancy going on. Just our basic host of tools, extrude, knife tool, you know, all the usual suspects. So even though you can say you've modeled a car, if you kind of follow along with this, it's really not that daunting, trust me. Okay, so at least I've got something kind of in place here. And now I can start to work with the cylinder to start my wheel. So we'll rotate this sideways, rotate at 90 degrees, kind of get it in place. And one of the tricks that kind of sells this low polygon look is, well, obviously lowering the amount of segments. So something like 8 or maybe 10 will be a small amount that will kind of help sell this sort of stylized, cartoony look. So I'm going to call this, and make it editable. And the first thing we want to do when we make a cylinder editable is optimize it. Always want to do that. And shrink this down a little bit more, I think. Kind of raise it up. And if I select just the polygons on the side here, I can start to inner extrude and make sort of the tire and the wheel. So I'm not going to make anything too fancy. I'm going to call this good for the wheel. So this will be the wheel. Wheel, if I cannot spell. And then the rest of the material will be the rubber for the tire. So that's pretty simple. For the time being, I will instance this object to bring it back to the rear so that we've got the rear wheel. And then let's follow those modeling steps on the car here, or on the rear, sorry. So again, to kind of walk through that process, we select these two polygons here because we want to make sure that we're making space inside of the car. So we'll extrude a little bit. Just kind of nudge it into place. And then I'm going to grab some of these components here and just sort of size it back up. And then extrude. Use the normal extrude tool to bring that into the body. And here I'm just trying to kind of create the inside of this wheel well, which is a relatively rounded shape. Turn that wheel back on. It fits. It's a little snug, but it fits. Cool, cool, cool. So I'm going to address sort of the gap in this front wheel well. Just nudge these polygons a little bit. Bring those in. Raise this up a little tiny bit. Sweet. So if I put these two wheels as a child of the car and then turn my symmetry object back on, we see that we've got a relatively complete car. not too complicated. So then I can make this editable, and we got everything we need. So we have our wheels as separate objects, which we can animate to make rotate, and the fronts. On a real car, like a real rigged, realistic car, you would obviously want separated front wheels because they would need to steer from each of their own points. What I mean by that is if I grab this front left tire and go to angle it so that it would turn, see, to kind of make the car turn from this side, obviously that wheel is all sorts of messed up now. But because I'm just kind of doing a simplistic thing, I don't really need to worry about turning too much. But if you wanted to address that, what you would want to do is select all the polygons of that wheel using the UW select connected command, and then you could just split this, which is UP, and then delete this one. So then you've got two front wheels. But I'm just going to undo some of that because I'm not going to be too concerned about it. We could get a little bit fancier and add, you know, bumper. Actually, I'm going to make a bumper just really, really quick, just because I do want to. We could add in, you know, headlights and other kinds of fun stuff, but I don't think it's going to be too necessary. So I'm just going to add a split down the middle of that because I did sort of angle the nose of the car. And then I'm going to select these two end polygons and extrude these out a little bit. And then select this one there and that one there. And then extrude these out a bit. And I'm not going to worry about stuff intersecting too much. I'm not going to get hung up on that because this car is going to be pretty dang small in relation to the rest of my city, so I can kind of get away with that detail a little bit. Just sort of curve out the front of that. So that'll be my front bumper. Kind of lower it a little bit just because I like the way that looks. Sweet. So this will be front bumper, and we'll drag this down into that whole shebang down there, and then we'll copy it, flip it 180, and this will be the rear bumper. And I need to make that overhang a little bit less deep just because of the sort of shape of my rear fender, or rear quarter panel. So there we go. I think that's going to be it for the car. Cool. So we can now select this car base and copy it back into our main project. And line it up in somewhere kind of like this, you know, whatever. No biggie. So just real quick, I'm going to apply the materials to this while it's here. And well, actually I'm going to solo it so that I can do that. So I'm going to apply the windows, the reflective window glass, sort of the same one that I'm using for the buildings, to the windows of the car, because just like the buildings, I don't want to model the interior of my car, just to kind of save myself some effort. So I don't want to be able to see into the car and, you know, sort of break that mystery or that illusion. And I'm going to make another material and call it chrome. And I'm going to use this on the bumpers. So I'm going to go to reflectance and add in a Beckman reflectance layer and just add in a little bit of roughness. And turn off the default specular. And I'm going to apply this chrome to the bumpers. Oop, that's the rear bumper. And this same actually material I'm going to use for the centers of the wheels. Kind of where the hubcap would be. And then we'll make another material and call this tire rubber. And make this sort of a grayish, darkish color. Pull the specular down a bit. Apply that to those wheels there. And then I'm going to make a material for the body of the car. So I'm going to call this car 1. And we'll make this red. Again, I'm going to kind of pull down that specular. And I'm going to add in a little bit of a reflection and just pull that down quite a bit so that this reflection layer is not at 100%. Just pull it down a bit so that the car is a little shiny, but not too shiny, but just a little bit. We have everything soloed. So if we pull the car kind of out over here just so that we can see it, just kind of check out what it's going to look like rendered. So it's a little something. Those windows are a little bit too reflective for me. Those are like mirrors, which is a little extreme. So I'm going to adjust the material on my window glass layer, I think. Still a little bit too shiny. Alright, that's not too bad. I'm kind of liking it with a little bit of color tone. So I added in some blue into that material. And I kind of like the way that that's looking on the buildings as well. It's sort of simulating the fact that there was probably a blue sky kind of environment around here, so I'm digging it. So as far as animating this car, I just want to kind of align it to my roads. So I think I'm just going to make each car kind of drive along each street. Just going to kind of do it by hand, I think, this time, instead of trying to use a cloner to populate the cars like the trees. And before I do that, it's probably a good idea now to kind of think about how long my animation is going to be. So I'm going to set up my render settings while I'm in here. and probably give myself 100 and, I don't know, I'll say 180 frames, which will be 6 seconds. So I'm going to, with this first car placed sort of where I want it to start driving, I'm going to go to the Coordinates tab and open up this Freeze Transformations button, and I'm going to click Freeze P for freeze position, and we see that this will enter in 0 values on these coordinates, but it's not actually moving my car. And the reason I want to do that is because now I've got a nice clean slate to add keyframes into my X, Y, or Z position values. So I'll set the beginning keyframe and the end keyframe, and then open up my timeline, F-curve, and I know off the bat I don't want this car to accelerate. I guess I'll just play it so that we can see what I mean. So this car, right now it has sort of an easy ease sort of effect applied to the animation, so we're going to see at the beginning here the car is going to move. If I can position our camera. Actually, I'm going to turn my buildings off just so that we can see this. Alright, so with this situated, we can see this all. I'm going to rewind. So we'll see that our car is going to start from a complete standstill, and then it'll sort of speed up. It's going faster here, and then it slows down at the end. And just because I'm going to be animating these all going in straight lines, I actually want to make these linear keyframes. So with these keyframes here selected in the timeline, we can see that they are set to what Cinema 4D calls spline, but sort of the broader animation term is easy ease. I'm going to select these and make them linear, and we'll see that that changes that to a straight line. And now when I animate this, the car is just kind of going at a steady pace, just kind of putting along the road. So that'll be that car. So I'm going to make a null and call it cars null, and put this into my geometry folder, and insert my first car into that, because I'm going to now duplicate this and make a second car. And because I've already started animating something, I don't want to sort of have to reanimate that each time I want to use it. So to move this second car now, the way that I'm going to move it is, instead of using these arrow tools, or the move tool arrows, I'm going to use these values here in the freeze P value. Because we'll see here, now this car will just drive straight along this road. And I didn't have to keyframe that, I didn't have to do it over again, I didn't have to do any of that work on the timeline. So that's cool. So I'm going to do that same thing probably 2 or 3 more times. Just make a handful of these cars, and then I'll start changing their colors. We'll call this one car 2, and this one's color we'll make a blue. So all we have to do to change the color of the car is just replace this red sort of car paint material with the blue one, so now this car is blue. And we'll see if we play this through, we'll have a handful of these cars all moving. Now in my case, I'm not going to want any of them to collide with each other, so I want to be kind of mindful of which roads I'm placing them on. As fun as it would be to make this into a demolition derby or like a game of Twisted Metal, I'm going to refrain from that. Hopefully that doesn't disappoint anyone. So right now I'm just editing some of the values of these keyframes by selecting them just to give a little tiny bit of variation to how fast each of these cars is moving. So that way they're not all going the exact same speed. And what I can do, I think just to give it a little bit of spice, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make one car that kind of goes and stops before it collides into another car, and then pick back up. So we'll call this car 5, and I'm going to make this extra car a new material. I'm going to make this one yellow. So this car I'm going to try to position so that it almost, yeah, so here I've got a collision here with the red car. So what I'm going to do is right before it gets to this position, I'm going to stop it, select this keyframe, copy, Control C, and then go forward in time to where the red car is no longer in this intersection, and then paste this keyframe. So we'll see that now the yellow car will drive, stop, because technically in this space of time right here that I have selected, it is not moving. It has an identical keyframe, and then from here it then picks back up and goes. So on this one, I do want to go back to the timeline because this car is immediately stopping and starting, completely. It's like as if it's slamming on the brakes and then slamming on the gas when it does want to start up and stop. So for these keys, I am going to turn them back to linear. So let's see what this looks like with the yellow car now. So it drives, goes to a stop, and then picks back up. Sweet. Awesome. So I think that's good enough as far as the animated cars. I know this won't apply to everyone, so I don't want to drag on it too long. I have kind of spent half of today's lecture on this car, so I think it's a good point to put it to rest. So we'll turn our buildings back on, and I think we're going to realize that some of these buildings are a little bit too big, particularly this mega huge one in the middle, because it is blocking bunch of roads that cars are going to be driving on. So I'm going to address this random scale value and just maybe change the seed a little bit, or change the size value here, just so that some of these buildings aren't so dang large. Cool, so now I don't have to worry about buildings blocking the roads because I tweaked this random scale that was in my buildings group a little bit, and I was easily able to find and locate that because everything is very expertly named and organized. So I think the last thing I'm going to add is a little bus stop. So let me just check a reference. So just kind of like one of these little booths with a little bench in the middle and sort of maybe the rounded top. I think that's a good amount of detail to shoot for. So I'm going to do the same sort of thing, start with a cube, and I'm going to make it sort of about the size of one of these cars, even though that might not be realistically sized. I don't care. So make a new file, paste this in. Oops. So it's going to kind of reset out its position, and we'll start modeling. So this will be bus stop. Make this editable. And I'm going to add in, actually before I make it editable, I do want to add in some segments, because I do want to give myself these polygons for the little glass panes. So get rid of that one, and then all of these, I can delete the ones on the bottom because this won't need a bottom. And then I'm going to delete these ones from the front because it needs an entrance. So we're left with just sort of these outer sides, and I'm going to extrude a little bit, and I'm going to make sure that I uncheck preserve groups just like we did on the car, so that way I've got little bits of room here. So I'm going to make a selection just like always and call this window glass selection. Spell it right this time. And then I'm going to, instead of extruding those inwards, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert my selection and then extrude these outwards. And this time I do want to check my maximum angle. Yeah, there we go. So this way it kind of creates thickness where the little metal railings will be. Cool. So from here it's not a whole lot more complicated. I just have to add in a little bit of a bench. So we'll do that just by making a teeny tiny cube. Shrink that height, shrink that depth, shrink the width, shrink the height a little bit more, maybe give it a little bit more. So it looks like this bench is kind of connected to the metal there, so that's not too hard. Make it a little bit wider maybe. And then I'm just going to add the roundness on the top. So to do that, I'm going to add in a handful of cuts with my knife. Change it to loop. So that, ooh, that was weird. So I'm going to select all the points along this seam that I know that I just added this cut. And an easy way to then turn this into a line selection is to hold Control when we click edges, and we'll see that that then just converted that to the identical edge selection. And because we see that we've got these weird zigzags going on, I'm going to scale this, in this case in the blue axis, down to 0% so that we see that this is a nice perfect line now, which makes me happy. And then basically to recreate this roundness, what I have to do is I have to add in a handful of extra edge loops, and an easy way in this case to do that is to bevel. So I'm going to grab my bevel tool and I'm going to raise my subdivisions a little bit, and we'll see that I can space these out, and I've got a nice handful of evenly placed edge loops up here, which is cool. So I'm going to select all of these points that I just newly made, which are going to make up the top of my bus stop. Deselect all that stuff on the bottom because I don't want to edit those. These ones at the top are all that I want to edit. So what I'm going to do, and I believe we did this a very, very, very long time ago when we were making the chair for our desks, our desk scene, is we're going to grab these sort of loop by loop and then deselect and sort of move them kind of inch by inch. So I'm moving, deselecting, moving, deselecting. And I've created an archway at the top now. So that wasn't too hard. Pretty simple. Sweet. So that's that. Call that bench. And then we'll copy this back into our main scene and place it where that cube was placed. Get rid of that temporary cube. Get back our bus stop. Oopsie daisy. Mess something up. There we go. Delete that temporary cube, and we're back in action with our bus stop. So we can rotate that 180 degrees. Place one of them there, kind of to the side of the road. This bus stop is as tall as one story of a building. Oh well. Deal with it. So we can apply some materials to this. And I'm going to use, obviously we want to use the window glass material and the glass selection. Ooh. Hold on now. Alright, so we have a little bit of editing to do. So with this selection tag selected, I've got to make some fixes. So I'm going to reselect where I want the glass to go. And then with this selection tag selected, I'm going to go back to the select menu at the top and hit set selection, and it'll reset that glass material. And then I'm going to use one of my fun car colored. One's maybe yellow. And we'll use this as the basis for the bus stop. So it's, ooh, it's kind of a gnarly color combination. It's an IKEA themed bus stop. So we'll make a group for the bus stops. So that way I can duplicate a couple of these. Alright, I don't want to get too fancy with that, but that's the bus stops, I think. So let's just check our kind of rendering a little bit more, maybe tweak some of our materials a little bit further. So one thing, at least to me, that's very apparent is how dark our shadows are. I think it's a little bit too kind of harsh. So what I want to add in, I think, is I want to add in a sky object. And I'm going to add a sort of sky blue luminance material to this sky. I don't need too much saturation. And this will be sky blue. Oops, 2 L's. And let's see what this looks like rendered. I think this will help brighten stuff up. Yeah, that's cool. So this made this a little bit more kind of friendly, cheerful looking. It's not so harsh and dark and scary. Although, I don't know, maybe if your city was Gotham, maybe you would want it to look dark and scary. But my city is a happy little cartoon city. We don't want our citizens to be scared. So I think a bright light is what I want. So I think that'll wrap it up for now. The last thing I do want to show you is, I think off camera before the last lecture, I did play around with a little bit of the render settings, and I want to go over that with you. So let me let me render this one camera, and we can see, we'll notice in the shadows how dark they are. And then I'm going to re-enable this setting that I had just previously unchecked, called global illumination, and I'm going to render again. And we'll see that this makes it go a little bit slower, but what we're going to notice is we're going to see more detail kind of in these shadows. So if I kind of zoom in on this tree area, we'll see we're getting a little bit more color, a little bit more life. There's just more lighting overall. I think I touched on some of this in the bottle rendering lectures. I can't quite remember. I think I did. But this global illumination setting is going to be visible under the effects list. So then you'll find it in the list, add it. And the settings that I changed is this primary and secondary method. These are relatively good settings for quickness. They're not the most realistic settings that we have available to us, but they're going to make sure that the render is not going to slow down too much. If you take the advanced rendering class, which I think is 2530 maybe, you'll learn a lot more about this. in the future, or you can look stuff up online. Feel free to do that. The last thing I'm going to add into this effects list is ambient occlusion, and just click render and just see what this looks like. And what ambient occlusion is going to do is it's going to add in a little bit of shadowing in sort of like the crevices, like the little nooks and crannies of our scene, so we can see kind of sort of along the tops of the buildings. It's looking a little bit more realistic. There's a little bit kind of shading in here, especially like in the windowsills and sort of next to the roads. Kind of looks like there's some curbs and stuff. It's adding in some extra little shadowing to some of the buildings. And what ambient occlusion is if I render again, we'll see. Don't do what I just did, I'm just doing it for visual demonstration purposes. Is what the ambient occlusion render is it's essentially this white render with a little bit of black shadowing and shading kind of in those parts that I had just mentioned, the nooks and crannies of the buildings, the windowsills, etc. Basically, where any two objects are getting close to intersecting or coming close to each other, it's going to add this effect. So it's basically just taking this and sort of overlaying it over our image. So here's the one without it, here's the one with it, without it, with it. So just another little trick, and I think that'll wrap it up for the render settings. There might be one more part after this, I don't know. So maybe stay tuned. We'll see.